So discriminated unions, really useful. Another very useful feature is typecasting. Typecasting helps you tell TypeScript that some value is of a specific type where TypeScript is not able to detect it on its own, but you as a developer know that it will be the case. And a good example for this is if we get access to something in the DOM. Let's say here we have a paragraph in the DOM, only a paragraph, nothing else in there, and it's an empty paragraph. So obviously if we save that, we don't see anything here on the screen. Now we can get access to that paragraph from inside our script here. Const paragraph with document query selector p, for example. Now when we use query selector and we pass in p as a selector, so selecting by the p tag, then TypeScript is actually able to find out, as you can see if I hover over it, that this will be of type paragraph element. Or null, because maybe such an element doesn't exist in the page. But that's a different thing. Let's ignore the or null case for now. The important thing is that TypeScript actually finds out that this is a paragraph element. Now this changes if we select by something else. Let's say an ID. We name this here message output. So this paragraph has an ID of message output. Now we as a developer of course know that we assigned this ID to this paragraph. But TypeScript doesn't know that. TypeScript does not dive into our HTML files and analyze them. So if we now select by that ID here, for example with getElementById, then we see what TypeScript infers is that this is just an HTML element, or null. It doesn't know which specific HTML element that is. Now, for a paragraph, that might not matter too much. Maybe we just want to do things with it that we could do with any HTML element. For example, access its text content or anything like that. But what if we had an input here? What if we actually had an input type text and we want to get the value the user entered? So I'll give it an ID of user input and now I select this in my TypeScript code. So here I select by ID user input and it's no longer a paragraph but user input element. Now we as a developer, we know that here we reach out to this input element. But as I said, TypeScript doesn't know that. TypeScript doesn't read our HTML code, so TypeScript only knows that it's some HTML element. Now, if I would want to set the value property of this, therefore, and I would try to do user input element dot value equal hi there, you see that I actually get an error. I get an error because, for one, this object is possibly null. We can fix this by adding an exclamation mark after this, and I'll come back to this in a second. But even then I still get an error that value does not exist on type HTML element. Because this generic type, which basically any HTML element has as a type, does not support properties that are specific to, well, specific HTML elements. So we would need to tell TypeScript that actually what we select here is not just not null, but that it's also of type HTML input element. And that's what we can do with typecasting. Now there are two ways of typecasting, two syntaxes we can use, and they are equivalent. One is that we add something in front of the thing we want to convert, or where we want to tell TypeScript the type. We add angle brackets, opening and closing, and then between these brackets, the type of the thing after the angle brackets. In this case, HTML input element. And this type is globally available because in my tsconfig file, I am including the DOM lib. With that, TypeScript knows that whatever we select here after the angle brackets will be of type HTML input element, and therefore it doesn't complain anymore. So this is version 1. Let me copy that and comment it out and show you the alternative. This works absolutely fine and you can use this. Now, if you know React, however, you know that there you also have such an angle bracket syntax inside of JavaScript or TypeScript, if you use that for React files, where you write JSX code in your React components. Now, if you don't know React, that might not tell you much. Just be aware that a similar syntax exists in React projects, and there the angle brackets are not used to pass any information regarding the types you're using, but instead they are parsed by some build tools and by React ultimately to know what you want to render on the screen. So totally detached from TypeScript. To not clash with that JSX syntax, the TypeScript team provides an alternative to this angle bracket typecasting. You can also add something after the thing you want to typecast, so after this selection in this case, and that thing is the as keyword. And then here you again add the type to which you want to cast this. So this now tells TypeScript that the expression in front of it, in this case this expression here, will yield a value of type HTML input element. And therefore again we get no error. So this is an alternative, and you can use either of the two syntaxes, whatever you prefer. You just should try to be consistent throughout your project then, so that you don't alternate between these two syntaxes. But with that, you can pass this valuable extra information to TypeScript and make code like this work, even though TypeScript on its own would not be able to find out that this here yields a HTML input element. Of course, since you're forcing TypeScript to use this type, it's your responsibility as a developer to ensure that whatever this expression yields will be of that type. Otherwise, you might get a runtime error or unexpected behavior at runtime if you try to interact with that element in a way that actually is not supported. So typecasting is a powerful feature, so is this exclamation mark here. I actually did explore this a little bit earlier in the course already. This exclamation mark allows us to tell TypeScript that the expression in front of it will never yield null. And this is required for some expressions like this here, when we select something from the DOM that might return null. If we know as a developer that this will never return null, then we can use this exclamation mark. Otherwise, and you learned that already, I just want to reiterate on that. Otherwise, if you're not sure that this will not return null, you can use a if check. So you could check if user input element is truthy, and therefore it is not null, and then use it in there. Now, I had to remove the typecasting in this case, because if we do typecast here, we also tell TypeScript that this will not be null. And since I'm not certain about that, I can't cast here. Instead, I have to do that here when I use the value, and therefore I want to do it before I access the value property by adding as HTML input element like this. Of course, that, however, would fail. This is invalid syntax. We would try to access a value property on an HTML input element thing, and this doesn't even make sense. We simply have to wrap this expression into parentheses then to make sure that this is evaluated first, and then we try to access value on the result of this expression. And now we have that alternative to using the exclamation mark.